I was just a broke waitress trying to catch the last bus home when I found her, a 10-year-old in an expensive uniform, burning with fever in a dark alley. I should have called 911, but instead I made a call that would make me either the most protected or the most hunted woman in the city. The fluorescent lights of the downtown bus terminal hummed with a tired electric drone as rain hammered against the glass walls like desperate fists seeking shelter. Alaia Stone pressed her forehead against the cold window of the terminal, watching the city blur into streaks of neon and shadow. Her polyester uniform clung to her back, damp with the kind of sweat that came from 8 straight hours of carrying plates and forcing smiles at customers who never learned her name. At 32, Alaia had stopped counting the ways her life had narrowed into something small and manageable. The diner on 5th Street paid minimum wage plus whatever tips accumulated in the chipped coffee mug by the register. Her apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up where the elevator had been broken for 3 years, and the neighbor's television played game shows through walls thin enough to hear every contestant's wrong answer. She checked her phone. 11:47 p.m. The last bus to her neighborhood left in 8 minutes. Miss it, and she'd be walking 40 minutes through streets where police sirens were as common as car alarms. Alaia shouldered her worn canvas bag and pushed through the terminal doors into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, November wind cutting through her thin jacket like it wasn't even there. She pulled the hood up and started toward the bus shelter, counting the money in her head. Rent was due in 5 days. She was short by $80. Again. The sound reached her before she saw anything. A small voice, barely audible over the rain and traffic, calling out in a way that made her stomach clench with instinct. Help. Please. Somebody help. Alaia stopped, every survival instinct she'd developed in this city screaming at her to keep walking. Nothing good came from getting involved in street situations after dark. But the voice was young, very young. She turned toward the alley beside the terminal where the sodium lights barely penetrated the darkness. Her heart hammered as she stepped off the main sidewalk, scanning the shadows for movement. There, crumpled against a dumpster like something discarded and forgotten, was a child. Alaia's breath caught. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old, wearing a school uniform that looked expensive even soaked through with rain. Her blonde hair stuck to her face in wet strands, and her skin had a grayish pallor that sent immediate alarm bells ringing in Alaia's head. Oh God. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the child. Hey, sweetie, can you hear me? The girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Alaia touched her forehead and jerked her hand back. The child was burning up, fever radiating through her skin like she was on fire from the inside. Okay. Alaia's mind raced. She needed to call 911. But as she reached for her phone, the girl's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. No hospital. The words came out in a hoarse whisper. They'll find me there. Who will find you? Alaia asked, but the girl's eyes were rolling back, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Alaia checked the girl's pockets, looking for identification or a phone. Nothing. But tucked into the collar of her uniform was a small silver pendant, expensive-looking, with an engraving that caught the dim light. On the back, 3 words were etched in elegant script, property of Castello. Beneath that, a phone number. Alaia stared at the pendant, her hands shaking. Everything about this screamed danger. A wealthy child alone in an alley, sick enough to be dying, afraid of hospitals. The kind of situation that got innocent people killed for knowing too much. But looking down at the girl's face, watching her shallow breathing and the way her small fingers had gone slack against Alaia's wrist, she knew there was no choice at all. She dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a man answered. His voice was rough, impatient, and carried the kind of authority that suggested he wasn't used to being interrupted. What? I found a little girl. Alaia forced her voice to stay steady. She's unconscious in an alley by the downtown bus terminal. She's wearing a pendant with this number on it, and she's really sick. Like, really sick. Silence. So complete and absolute that Alaia wondered if the call had dropped. Then, describe her. Blonde hair, maybe 10 years old, school uniform, gray and blue. The pendant says Castello. The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite a word. It was something between a curse and a prayer, raw with an emotion Alaia couldn't identify. Don't move. The man's voice had changed completely, sharp with command and something that might have been fear. Don't let anyone near her. I'm coming. Wait, I don't even know who. But the line was already dead. Alaia looked down at the unconscious child, then up at the rain-soaked alley entrance. She'd just called someone whose last name was property, stamped on a child's necklace. Someone who gave orders like breathing and expected absolute obedience. She pulled off her jacket and wrapped it around the girl, trying to keep her warm despite knowing it was probably pointless. The fever was so high that Alaia could feel heat radiating through the fabric. Medical intervention was needed, and soon, or this child wasn't going to make it. Come on, baby. She brushed wet hair from the girl's forehead. Whoever's coming, they better get here fast. The minutes stretched like hours. Alaia found herself checking the girl's pulse repeatedly, terrified each time that she wouldn't find one. The small chest rose and fell in irregular patterns, and occasionally the girl would mumble something incoherent, lost in fever dreams. At exactly 11:58 p.m., the sound of engines cut through the rain. Not one vehicle, but several, moving fast and in formation. Alaia's head snapped up as headlights flooded the alley entrance, 3 black SUVs pulling up with military precision. Doors opened simultaneously. Men emerged, 6 of them, all dressed in dark suits that probably cost more than Alaia made in 6 months. They moved like soldiers, scanning the alley with practiced efficiency before one of them spoke into a radio. Location secure. Bring him in. The rear door of the center SUV opened, and a man stepped out. Even from a distance, even in the rain and shadows, Alaia could tell this was someone important. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His coat was open despite the rain, and beneath it she could see an expensive suit and the kind of watch that could pay her rent for a year. But it was his eyes that made her throat go dry. Dark and cold and capable of terrible things, they swept across the alley until they found the small figure on the ground. Then something in those eyes shattered. The man moved faster than Alaia expected, crossing the distance in seconds. He dropped to his knees beside the girl with a kind of controlled desperation that suggested he was used to commanding his emotions, but barely holding them back now. Sophie. His voice cracked on the name. His hands moved over the child with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to check for injuries, but Alaia could see them shaking. Sophie. Baby. I'm here. The girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Daddy? I've got you. The man lifted her so carefully, like she was made of glass. I've got you now. One of the suited men stepped forward with a medical bag, already pulling out equipment. Alaia recognized him as a doctor by the way he immediately started checking vitals and assessing symptoms. Fevers at 104. The doctor's voice was professionally calm. Possible sepsis. We need to get her to the facility now. The man, this Castello person, stood with his daughter cradled against his chest. His eyes found Alaia for the first time, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. You called. It wasn't a question, but Alaia nodded anyway. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her wet uniform, her canvas bag, the bus schedule still visible in her hand. Then he looked down at his daughter, wrapped in Alaia's cheap jacket. What's your name? Alaia Stone. Alaia Stone. He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. You work at the diner. Again, not a question. Alaia realized he could see the logo on her uniform. Yes. Why didn't you call 911? Why did you call me? She told me not to go to the hospital. Alaia's voice was steadier than she felt. She said they'd find her there. I didn't know what else to do, so I used the number on her necklace. Something flickered across the man's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Smart girl, both of you. He turned toward the SUVs, his daughter limp in his arms. The other men immediately fell into formation around him, creating a protective circle. Alaia watched them prepare to leave, feeling oddly dismissed, like her role in this drama had ended. But then he paused and looked back. Paul. He addressed one of the suited men. Get her information. All of it. The man named Paul approached Alaia with a phone in his hand, his expression professionally neutral. Address, phone number, where you work, family members. Why do you need to know that? Alaia took a step back, alarm bells ringing. Because my employer doesn't forget debts. Paul's tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. And because you've just become a loose end that needs to be accounted for. Alaia's heart hammered, but she gave him the information. What choice did she have? These weren't the kind of people you said no to. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she understood that cooperation was the only thing keeping her safe right now. By the time she looked up again, the main vehicle was already pulling away, carrying the man and his daughter toward whatever private medical facility they had access to. The remaining men climbed into their SUVs with practiced efficiency. Within 90 seconds, the alley was empty again. Just Alaia, standing in the rain, wondering if she'd saved a child's life or signed her own death warrant. She missed her bus. The next one didn't come for another hour, so she walked home through the rain, replaying every moment in her head. The girl's gray skin, the father's desperate eyes, the casual way those men had moved, like violence was a language they spoke fluently. By the time Alaia reached her apartment building, she was soaked through and shivering. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs with legs that felt like lead, let herself into the small space she called home, and finally let herself fall apart. She didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the building made her jump. Every car that passed on the street below might be them, coming back because she'd seen too much, or knew too much, or simply because loose ends were dangerous. When dawn finally broke, painting her windows with weak gray light, Alaia was still sitting on her couch, staring at her phone, wondering if she should run. The knock came at 7:30 a.m., sharp and authoritative. Alaia's blood turned to ice. She approached the door slowly, checking the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, middle-aged, professional-looking, carrying a leather briefcase. Miss Stone? The woman's voice was polite but firm. I need to speak with you. Who are you? I represent someone you met last night. Please open the door. This won't take long. Alaia's hand shook as she unlocked the deadbolt. The woman entered with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted, her eyes sweeping over the small apartment with professional assessment. How is she? Alaia heard herself ask. The girl. Is she okay? The woman's expression softened slightly. Recovering. The fever broke around 4 this morning. She's going to be fine, thanks to you. Relief flooded through Alaia so intensely she had to sit down. Thank God. The woman set her briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with precise movements. Miss Stone, my employer, asked me to deliver this to you personally. She pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, expensive. Alaia took it with numb fingers and opened it. Inside was a check. She stared at the number, certain she was reading it wrong. $50,000. I can't accept this. Alaia tried to hand it back, but the woman didn't take it. It's not a request. The woman's tone was firm. Consider it a thank you for saving his daughter's life, and compensation for your discretion regarding last night's events. There it was. The real reason. Alaia set the check down on the table between them. You want me to stay quiet. I want you to stay safe. The woman met her eyes directly. There are people in this city who would use any information about that child to hurt her and her father. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if they thought you knew something valuable. Your silence protects everyone, including yourself. Alaia felt cold despite the stuffy warmth of her apartment. And if I don't stay quiet? The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went hard. Then the money won't help you. Nothing will. But I don't think you're that foolish. You didn't call the police last night. You didn't call the press. You called the one number that could actually help that child. That tells me you're smart enough to know when to walk away. She stood, closing the briefcase with a decisive click. The money is yours regardless. Spend it, save it, burn it. That's your choice. But the silence isn't optional. After she left, Alaia sat staring at the check for a long time. $50,000. It would solve every financial problem she had. Pay off her debts, get her into a better apartment, maybe even let her go back to school like she'd always dreamed. But it also felt like blood money. Payment for pretending she hadn't seen something, for being a good little witness who knew when to keep her mouth shut. She went to work that afternoon, the check hidden in the back of her sock drawer. The diner was busy, the usual lunch rush of construction workers and office staff grabbing quick meals. Alaia moved through her shift on autopilot, refilling coffee and taking orders, while her mind replayed the previous night in an endless loop. It was during the 3 o'clock lull that everything changed. The door chimed, and Alaia looked up from wiping down table 4. 3 men entered, and she knew immediately they weren't regular customers. They wore suits, but cheaper than the ones from last night. Their eyes scanned the diner with predatory assessment, and, when they spotted Alaia, all 3 smiled. The smiles made her skin crawl. They took a booth in her section, and Alaia approached with her order pad, trying to keep her expression neutral. "What can I get you?" The man in the middle, heavy-set with a scar along his jawline, leaned back and studied her. "You're Alaia Stone. We don't serve coffee with names." Alaia kept her voice light. "Just the regular kind. Cute." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We hear you had an interesting night. Found something valuable in an alley." Alaia's pulse hammered, but she kept her expression blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" The man to his left, thin with dead eyes, pulled out a phone and showed her a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance but clear enough. It showed Alaia kneeling beside a small figure in an alley, her phone pressed to her ear. "Security cameras are everywhere these days," Deadeyes said conversationally. "Funny thing is, after you made that call, some very interesting people showed up. People connected to a very powerful family." Alaia's mind raced. She glanced toward the kitchen, calculating distances. The cook was in the back. Her coworker had stepped out for a smoke. She was alone with these men. "I don't know anything." She forced her voice to stay steady. "I found a sick kid and called the number on her necklace." "That's it. That's it," the scarred man repeated slowly. "So you wouldn't know anything about where they took her? What kind of security they have? Whether anyone's watching her now?" Understanding crashed over Alaia like cold water. These weren't just criminals. These were rivals. The kind of people the woman this morning had warned her about. "No," Alaia said firmly. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." The tension in the booth went sharp and dangerous. The scarred man's smile disappeared. Wrong answer. He started to stand, and Alaia saw the bulge under his jacket that meant weapon. The door chimed again. Every head in the diner turned. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that marked him as different from the 3 in the booth. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he was the most dangerous person in any room. Alaia recognized him from last night. Paul, the one who'd taken her information. Gentlemen. Paul's voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. I think you're in the wrong neighborhood. The three men exchanged glances. The scarred one sat back down slowly, hands visible on the table. We're just having a conversation. Conversation's over. Paul stepped closer, and Alaia noticed two more men enter behind him, flanking the door. My employer takes a very dim view of people bothering his associates. The word associates hung in the air, transforming Alaia's status from witness to something protected. The three men understood immediately. Their expressions shifted from predatory to cautious. Tell your employer we meant no disrespect. The scarred man was already standing, gesturing for his companions to follow. We were just leaving. They filed out quickly, and Alaia released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The other diner customers had noticed something was wrong, but not quite what. And gradually conversation resumed its normal rhythm. Paul approached the counter, his expression neutral. You okay? Alaia nodded, not trusting her voice. They won't bother you again. Paul said it like a fact, like he could simply decree reality into compliance. But you need to understand something. There are people who want information about last night. People who won't ask as nicely as they did. I already told that woman I wouldn't say anything. I know. And my employer believes you. But belief doesn't stop rivals from trying. So until the situation stabilizes, you're going to have protection. I don't want protection. Alaia finally found her voice. I just want my normal life back. Paul's expression suggested that ship had sailed. He pulled out a card, plain white with just a phone number. You see anything suspicious? Anyone following you? Anything that feels wrong? You call that number immediately. Someone will respond within minutes. He set the card on the counter between them. You saved his daughter's life. Paul's tone softened slightly. He doesn't forget that kind of debt. But you've also stepped into a world where information is currency and witnesses are liabilities. Like it or not, you're part of this now. The protection isn't optional. After he left, Alaia stared at the card for a long time before finally putting it in her pocket next to her order pad. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. When she finally clocked out at 6, she found a black car waiting outside the diner. The driver rolled down the window. Miss Stone, I'm here to take you home. Alaia thought about refusing, about asserting some kind of independence. But the memory of those three men and their predatory smiles was too fresh. She got in the car. The driver was professional and silent, taking her directly to her building. He waited until she was inside before driving away, and Alaia realized with a sinking feeling that this was going to be her new normal, protected, watched, caught in the orbit of people she'd never wanted to know. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and let herself in, dropping her bag by the door. The check was still in her sock drawer, still representing a future she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Alaia answered with her heart in her throat. Hello? Miss Stone? The voice was the same one from last night, rough and commanding. This is Joe Castello. Alaia sank onto her couch. How's your daughter? Home. Safe. Because of you. There was a pause. I understand you had visitors today. Your man took care of it. My men will continue to take care of it. Joe's tone carried absolute certainty. I'm calling to explain something you've probably already figured out. By helping Sophie, you became connected to me. In my world, that connection makes you both protected and vulnerable. I didn't ask for this. No one asks for it. But here we are. Joe sounded tired suddenly, human in a way that surprised her. Look, Miss Stone. Alaia. I know this isn't fair. You were just trying to do the right thing, and now you're caught up in something dangerous. But I promise you two things. One, I will keep you safe. 2. I will find a way to make this right. The check is a start. But it's not enough. Not for saving my daughter's life. So I'm offering you a choice. Alaia's fingers tightened on the phone. What choice? You can take the money and the protection, and we'll do our best to let you live your life. You'll have guards you don't see, security you don't notice, or you can come work for me. Work for you. Alaia repeated the words, trying to process them. I own several legitimate businesses, restaurants, hotels, security firms, real companies with real employees and paychecks and benefits. I need someone I can trust, and trust is hard to buy in my world. But you've already proven yourself. You protected my daughter when you could have left her to die. You didn't sell information when those men came asking. That kind of integrity is rare. I'm a waitress. You're smart and brave and decent. Joe's voice carried conviction. Everything else can be taught. Think about it. Take your time. But Alaia, understand this. Whether you work for me or not, you're under my protection now. Anyone who touches you answers to me. And I'm not known for mercy. The call ended, leaving Alaia staring at her phone in the growing darkness of her apartment. She didn't sleep again that night. Instead, she sat at her window, watching the street below, thinking about choices and consequences and the way one moment of compassion had altered the entire trajectory of her life. By morning, she'd made her decision. 2 days later, Alaia called the number Joe had left her. He answered on the second ring. I'll take the job. She said it before she could change her mind. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to work in something legitimate. No gray areas. No looking the other way. If I'm going to do this, I need to be able to sleep at night. Joe was quiet for a moment. Agreed. What else? I want to be able to leave if it doesn't work out. No strings, no consequences. Also agreed. Though I think you'll surprise yourself with how well you adapt. And I want to see Sophie. Alaia wasn't sure where the request came from, but suddenly it felt important. Just to know she's really okay. Joe's voice warmed slightly. She's been asking about you, too. How about dinner this Sunday? My home. You can meet her properly. That Sunday, Alaia stood outside the Castello estate in the suburbs, staring up at iron gates and manicured lawns that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. A security guard checked her identification before waving her through, and she drove up a winding driveway that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. The house was massive but somehow not ostentatious. Modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows, more understated elegance than showy wealth. Alaia parked where directed and was met at the door by a housekeeper who led her through rooms that could have been featured in magazines. Joe waited in what he called the family room, though it was bigger than Alaia's entire apartment. He stood when she entered, and she was struck again by how different he looked from the desperate father in that rainy alley. Here, in his home, he seemed almost normal. Still powerful, still commanding, but softer somehow. Alaia. He extended his hand, and she shook it. Thank you for coming. Before she could respond, a blur of blonde hair came rushing into the room. You came. Sophie threw her arms around Alaia's waist, hugging her with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child. Daddy said you might come, but I wasn't sure if you would. But you did. Alaia found herself hugging back, something warm and unexpected blooming in her chest. Hey, kiddo. How are you feeling? Perfect. Sophie pulled back to look up at her, blue eyes shining. The doctor said I'm all better now. Daddy said you're the one who found me and called him and saved my life. I just made a phone call. The most important phone call, Joe said quietly. Without it, I would have lost her. Dinner was surprisingly normal. They ate pasta that Sophie insisted on helping make, even though the housekeeper clearly had everything under control. They talked about school and music lessons and the new puppy Sophie wanted but wasn't allowed to have because of security concerns. Alaia found herself relaxing despite everything, drawn in by Sophie's infectious enthusiasm and Joe's careful attentiveness as a father. This wasn't the criminal world she'd imagined. This was just a family, eating dinner, laughing at a 10-year-old's jokes. But later, after Sophie had been sent to bed despite her protests, Joe walked Alaia out to her car and the reality reasserted itself. "She's everything to me." He said it simply, standing in the circular driveway under security lights that made the night beyond seem impossibly dark. Her mother died when she was 3. Cancer. Since then, it's been just us. "I'm sorry." Joe shook his head. "I tell you this so you understand what you did. That night in the alley, you didn't just save a child. You saved the only good thing I've ever created in this world." Alaia looked back at the house, seeing Sophie's face in an upstairs window, waving enthusiastically. What happened to her? How did she end up in that alley? Joe's expression went hard. "Someone took her from her school. A rival family thought they could use her as leverage against me. They drugged her to keep her quiet, dumped her when the kidnapping went wrong, and their escape plan fell apart. But she said they'd find her at the hospital. Because they have people everywhere." Joe's voice was tired. "That's the world I live in, Alaia. Everyone's a potential asset or threat. That's why I need people I can trust. People who've proven themselves without ulterior motive." He turned to face her fully. "Tomorrow, I'll have Paul take you to the hotel. You'll start training with the operations manager. The work is real. The pay is real. The benefits are real. You'll learn everything about running high-end hospitality. And if you're good at it, which I suspect you will be, you'll advance on merit. And the other part? The dangerous part? Will stay as far from you as I can keep it." Joe's tone was firm. "But I won't lie to you. There will be moments when those worlds intersect. Times when you'll see things or know things that normal hotel managers don't. I need you to be okay with that." Alaia thought about the 3 men in the diner, about the casual way they'd threatened her, about the fact that she already knew things, had already been marked as connected. Going back to her old life wasn't really an option anymore. "I'm okay with it," she said finally, "as long as you keep your promise about keeping me safe. You have my word. And in my world, that's worth more than any contract." 3 weeks turned into 3 months. Alaia threw herself into learning the hotel business with the same determination that had gotten her through years of struggling in dead-end jobs. The Castello Hotel was a different world from the diner 5-star service, international clientele, the kind of attention to detail that made wealthy guests feel valued. She was good at it. Better than good. The operations manager, a woman named Jane, who'd been in hospitality for 20 years, told Joe that Alaia had natural instincts for reading people and solving problems before they escalated. But there were moments when the other world bled through. Like the afternoon 3 men in expensive suits took over the presidential suite, and the normal security team was replaced by Joe's people. Or the evening when she overheard a conversation in Italian that made the hairs on her neck stand up, even though she didn't understand the words. Paul, who'd become something like a friend, despite the awkwardness of their first meeting, explained it to her one day over coffee. "The hotel is legitimate, but it's also useful. People in certain businesses need neutral ground to meet. Places where they can talk without looking over their shoulders. Your job is to provide that service without asking questions. And if I do ask questions, then you stop being useful and start being a liability." Paul's tone was matter of fact, not threatening. "But don't worry, you're smart enough not to." Sophie visited often, always with security but growing more comfortable in Alaia's presence. They'd have lunch in the hotel restaurant, and Sophie would chatter about school and friends while Alaia listened and remembered what it was like to see the world with that kind of innocence. One afternoon, as Sophie carefully colored in a drawing she'd brought to show Alaia, she looked up with sudden seriousness. "Do you think my daddy's a bad man?" The question caught Alaia off guard. She set down her coffee carefully, buying time to think. "What makes you ask that?" "Kids at school say things." Sophie's voice was small. "About what their parents say about my daddy. About the family business." Alaia chose her words carefully. "I think your daddy loves you very much. And I think he does everything he can to keep you safe and happy. That's what fathers are supposed to do. But the other stuff makes his life complicated." Alaia reached across the table to still Sophie's nervous coloring. "But it doesn't change the fact that he's a good father to you. And that's what matters most." Sophie considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think you're right." Then, with the quick mood shift of childhood, "Can we get ice cream?" "Absolutely." Later, Alaia would think about that conversation and wonder if she'd said the right thing. Wonder if teaching a child that love could excuse moral complexity was preparing her for a life Alaia wasn't sure anyone should live. But in the moment, watching Sophie's smile return, she couldn't regret offering comfort. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, 4 months after that rainy night in the alley. Alaia was working late, reviewing quarterly reports in her office when the fire alarm went off. She grabbed her bag and headed for the stairs, following protocol. But something felt wrong. The alarm was too controlled, too rhythmic. And when she reached the stairwell, she found it empty. No other staff, no guests, nobody. Her instincts screamed danger. Alaia pulled out her phone and dialed the emergency number Paul had given her. It rang once before the lights went out. Darkness. Complete and absolute. Alaia's heart hammered as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the black, showing concrete walls and metal railings. She started down the stairs carefully, counting floors. 7, 6, 5. Footsteps above her. Multiple people moving fast. Alaia quickened her pace, taking the steps 2 at a time. 4, 3, 2. The door to the ground floor appeared ahead, and she lunged for it, bursting through into the lobby. More darkness, but through the windows she could see streetlights outside, normal life continuing, unaware. She ran for the front entrance. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Alaia found herself facing a man she'd never seen before, his face obscured by shadows. Not so fast. His accent was thick, Eastern European maybe. "We need to talk about your employer." Alaia drove her knee up hard, the way her brother had taught her years ago. The man grunted and his grip loosened. She jerked free and ran. Behind her, she heard shouting. More footsteps. The front doors were locked, security system engaged. Alaia changed direction, heading for the kitchen exit. If she could reach the alley, she might find help. The kitchen doors burst open as she approached. Paul stood there, gun drawn, 2 more security guards behind him. "Down!" he shouted. Alaia hit the floor. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. She covered her head, making herself as small as possible. The shooting lasted maybe 10 seconds, then silence. "Alaia." Paul was beside her, helping her up. "You hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Good. Come on, we need to get you out of here." He led her through the kitchen, past the men he'd shot, out into the alley where 3 cars waited. Joe stepped out of one, his face dark with fury. "Get her to the safe house," he ordered Paul, then looked at Alaia. "Are you injured?" "No." "Good. Then we'll talk later. Right now, you need to disappear for a while." "What happened?" "What happened is someone tried to kidnap my hotel manager to get leverage against me." Joe's voice was cold. "Someone made a very serious mistake. But that's my problem to solve. Your problem is staying alive while I solve it. Alaia found herself in a car, Paul driving fast through city streets, heading toward a part of town she didn't recognize. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by shaking that she couldn't control. It's okay. Paul's voice was surprisingly gentle. First time's always rough. First time being shot at. First time realizing this world is real, not theoretical anymore. Actually dangerous. They drove for 20 minutes before pulling into an underground garage. Paul led her to an elevator, then to a penthouse apartment with windows overlooking the river. You'll stay here tonight, he said. Maybe longer, depending on what Joe decides. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the bedroom that should fit. Don't go near the windows. Don't call anyone. I'll be in the apartment next door if you need anything. After he left, Alaia stood in the middle of the expensive apartment and finally let herself fall apart. She cried from fear and shock, and the realization that she'd been naive to think she could stay separate from the violence that defined Joe's world. But beneath the fear was something else. Anger. These people, whoever they were, had come into her space, threatened her life, tried to use her as a pawn, and she was done being a victim of other people's wars. Joe came the next morning, looking like he hadn't slept. He found Alaia on the couch, staring at the river through windows she'd been told not to approach. It's handled, he said without preamble. The men who came for you won't be a problem anymore. And their employer has been sent a message about the consequences of touching my people. Alaia turned to look at him. Your people. Is that what I am? Joe sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. 4 months ago, you were a stranger who happened to save my daughter. Now you're someone who's been shot at because of me. So yes, you're my people. Which means I'm responsible for keeping you safe. I don't want to live like this. Alaia's voice shook. Always looking over my shoulder. Always wondering if today's the day someone decides I'm valuable as a hostage. I know. Joe's expression was pained. And I'm sorry. This isn't what I wanted for you. Then let me go. Let me disappear somewhere. Start over. You said I could leave if I wanted. Joe was quiet for a long moment. I could do that. Give you a new identity. Set you up somewhere safe. But Alaia, they'd still come looking. Once you're connected to me, that connection doesn't just disappear because you change cities. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept that my life is in danger forever? No. Joe stood, moving to the window. You're supposed to decide if the life I can offer you is worth the risks that come with it. Good salary, meaningful work, protection from the most powerful organization in this city. Or you can take your chances alone, unprotected, hoping they forget about you. That's not really a choice. It's the only choice I can give you. Joe turned to face her, and for the first time she saw genuine regret in his eyes. I'm sorry, Alaia. Truly. You deserved better than this. But we're here now, and I'm doing the best I can to keep you alive while still letting you live. Alaia stood, crossing to stand beside him at the window. The city stretched out below them, full of people living normal lives with normal problems. She used to be one of them. Now she was something else entirely. I want to learn to protect myself, she said finally. If I'm going to live in this world, I need to know how to survive in it. Not just rely on your men showing up in time. Joe studied her face. You're serious. Completely. I'm done being helpless. A small smile crossed his face, the first she'd seen in days. All right, I'll arrange training, self-defense, situational awareness, basic security protocols. But Alaia, understand this means accepting what you've become. There's no going back once you commit to this path. I think we passed the point of no going back when I made that phone call 4 months ago. Joe nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. The training started the following week. Paul taught her how to identify threats, how to move through crowds, how to notice when she was being followed. A woman named Kelly, former military, taught her basic self-defense and how to handle a weapon she hoped she'd never need to use. It was exhausting and terrifying and strangely empowering. Alaia found herself changing, becoming more aware, more confident. The fear didn't disappear, but it transformed into something manageable. Sophie noticed the difference immediately. "You seem different," she said one afternoon over their regular lunch. "Stronger somehow." "Maybe I am." Alaia smiled. "Life has a way of making you stronger whether you want it to or not." "Is it because of the bad men who came to the hotel?" Sophie's voice was small. "Daddy said some people tried to hurt you." Alaia considered lying, protecting the child's innocence. But Sophie lived in this world too. She deserved truth, at least some of it. "Yes, but your daddy's people stopped them. And now I'm learning how to stop them myself if I need to." Sophie nodded seriously. "Daddy says the best way to be safe is to be strong. That's why I take classes too. Martial arts and stuff." "Smart man, your dad." Sophie grinned. "Don't tell him I said this, but sometimes I think he worries too much. Like, I'm just a kid. Who's going to bother me?" Alaia thought about that alley, about Sophie's gray skin and labored breathing. "People who want to hurt your dad," she said gently. "That's who. And your dad loves you enough to make sure they never get the chance." 6 months after that rainy night, Alaia stood in her new office, looking out over the city. She'd been promoted to assistant general manager of the hotel, a position that came with real responsibility and real respect. The staff knew her, trusted her, came to her with problems both professional and personal. But she also knew which rooms to avoid when certain guests arrived, knew which conversations to forget she'd overheard, knew the men in dark suits stationed throughout the building weren't there for normal hotel security. She'd become fluent in 2 languages, the legitimate business of hospitality and the shadowy language of protection and threat that ran underneath it all. Joe found her there one evening, after most of the staff had gone home. He carried 2 glasses of wine, offering her one, to survival. He raised his glass, to choices. Alaia countered, clinking hers against his, good and bad. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. "She asks about you," Joe said eventually. "Sophie. Wants to know when you're coming for dinner again." "Soon," Alaia promised. "This weekend if I can manage it. She thinks of you like family." Joe's voice was careful. "She doesn't have much of that. Her mother's parents want nothing to do with us because of who I am. My family is all back in Italy, so it's mostly just been us." Alaia looked at him, seeing vulnerability beneath the power. "And now it's not just you anymore." "No. Now there's you." Joe met her eyes. "However this happened, whatever brought you into our lives, I'm grateful for it. Not just because you saved her, because you stayed. I didn't have much choice. You had every choice." Joe's voice was firm. "You could have taken the money and run, refused the job, walked away after the attack. But you're still here. That's not obligation. That's choice." Alaia thought about that. About all the moments over the past 6 months when she could have quit, could have demanded to be released from this strange new life. But she hadn't. And not just because of fear or money or lack of options. She'd stayed because Sophie's hugs felt like coming home. Because the work challenged her in ways the diner never had. Because Paul had become a friend who taught her to shoot, and Kelly had become a mentor who pushed her to be stronger. Because Joe, for all his darkness and danger, had kept every promise he'd made. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. "Maybe I'm here because I want to be." "And how do you feel about that?" "Terrified." Alaia laughed softly. "But also more alive than I've been in years." "Is that crazy?" In this world? Joe smiled. That's perfectly sane. They stood together as night settled over the city, two people who'd been brought together by chance and desperation, now bound by something more complex than either could have predicted. That Sunday, Alaia drove to the Castello estate for dinner. Sophie met her at the door, pulling her inside with excited chatter about a school project on ancient civilizations. They cooked together in the massive kitchen, Sophie's small hands helping roll pasta while Joe supervised with the kind of careful patience that spoke of hard-won parenting skills. Over dinner, Sophie talked about her friends and her favorite teacher and the field trip she was excited about. Normal kid things that felt extraordinary in their ordinariness. This was the life Joe had built for her, Alaia realized. A bubble of normalcy inside a world of danger. After dinner, while Sophie did homework at the dining table, Joe and Alaia walked in the garden. Security lights illuminated paths between precisely maintained flower beds, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, Alaia knew armed men watched for threats. I've been thinking, Joe said, about what you said, about wanting to protect yourself. I'm getting better. The training helps. I'm sure it does. But I'm not talking about physical protection. Joe stopped walking, turning to face her. I'm talking about position. Right now, you're valuable to my enemies because you're close to me but not protected by family status. You're a weakness they can exploit. Alaia's stomach clenched. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a way to make you untouchable, to give you protection that goes beyond bodyguards and safe houses. Joe's dark eyes were serious. Marry me. Alaia actually laughed, thinking it was a joke, but his expression didn't change. You're serious. Completely. It would be a business arrangement. You'd keep your position at the hotel, your independence, your own life. But on paper, you'd be family. And in my world, family is sacred. No one touches family without starting a war. Joe, I can't. I don't. We barely know each other. We know each other well enough. Joe's voice was calm, reasonable. You've been part of my life for 6 months. You've proven yourself loyal and capable. You love my daughter, and she loves you. What else do we need to know? Love, Alaia said quietly. Normal people marry for love. Normal people aren't shot at in hotel lobbies, Joe countered. Look, I'm not asking you to pretend we're some fairy tale romance. I'm offering you a solution to a problem we both face. You need protection. Sophie needs a mother figure. I need someone I can trust in my life. This solves all 3 problems. And if I say no, then nothing changes. You're still under my protection. Still working at the hotel, still having dinner with us on Sundays. Joe's voice softened. But Alaia, I can't guarantee that protection is enough. Not after what happened. The only way to make you completely safe is to make you family. Alaia looked back at the house, seeing Sophie's blonde head bent over her homework through the window. She thought about the past 6 months, about how her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined, about how she'd come to care for both of them despite every logical reason not to. Can I think about it? Of course. Joe smiled slightly. I'm asking you to marry a criminal. That deserves some consideration. Alaia drove home that night with her mind spinning. The proposal was insane. Practical, maybe, in the twisted logic of Joe's world, but still insane. She barely knew him. What she did know suggested he was capable of terrible things. And yet, he'd kept every promise, protected her, given her opportunities, treated her with respect. And Sophie. God, Sophie had worked her way into Alaia's heart so completely that the thought of walking away from her felt physically painful. 2 days later, Alaia called Joe. I have conditions, she said without preamble. Name them. We have separate bedrooms. This is a business arrangement and I need that to be clear. Agreed. Sophie knows the truth. I won't lie to her about why we're doing this. also agreed. Joe sounded almost amused. What else? If I ever want out, you let me go. No threats, no consequences. You give me a divorce and enough money to start over somewhere safe. There was a pause. Alaia, if you marry me, you're family. I don't let family go. Then we don't have a deal. Another pause. Longer this time. Fine. If you ever want out, you can leave. But understand that my protection goes with you. You'll never be completely free of this world. I know, but I need to know the choice is mine. Then yes. You have my word. Alaia took a deep breath. Then I'll marry you. The wedding was small, just immediate family and a few key associates. Sophie served as flower girl, her excitement genuine even though she understood the complexity of what was happening. Joe had explained it to her carefully. Alaia was joining their family officially, becoming her stepmother. But it was also about keeping everyone safe. Sophie had hugged Alaia tight and whispered, I'm glad you're staying forever. Forever. Alaia had repeated, wondering if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. The marriage was exactly what Joe promised. Business arrangement with separate bedrooms in his massive house, respect for each other's space and independence. Alaia kept her position at the hotel, her own car, her own accounts. Nothing changed except her last name and the level of protection that came with it. But slowly, something else began to change. The careful distance between them started to feel less like protection and more like walls that didn't need to be there. It happened in small moments. Joe bringing her coffee in the morning before she left for work, knowing exactly how she liked it. Alaia helping Sophie with homework at the dining table while Joe worked in his study, all of them existing in comfortable proximity. The way he asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. The way she found herself wanting to tell him about small victories and frustrations at the hotel. 3 months into the marriage, Alaia woke at 2 a.m. to sounds from downstairs. She pulled on a robe and found Joe in the kitchen, staring at his phone with an expression she'd never seen before. Grief, raw and unguarded. What happened? He looked up, and she saw his eyes were red. My brother. In Italy. There was a hit tonight. He didn't make it. Alaia crossed the kitchen without thinking, pulling him into a hug. Joe stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against her, his careful control finally breaking. He didn't sob, but she felt his body shake with suppressed emotion. They stood like that for a long time, Alaia holding this dangerous man while he grieved for family lost to the same violence he'd built his empire on. When he finally pulled back, his expression was embarrassed. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to see that. We're family now, Alaia said firmly. That's what you told Sophie. Family sees each other's pain. Something shifted in his eyes. Thank you. From that night forward, the walls between them began to crumble. Not into romance exactly, but into something deeper. Partnership, trust. The kind of intimacy that came from sharing space and struggles and secrets. Sophie noticed the change and bloomed under it. She had both parents now, working together, supporting each other. Her grades improved. Her nightmares, which had been frequent since the kidnapping, became rare. One evening, almost a year after that rainy night in the alley, the three of them sat in the family room watching a movie Sophie had chosen. Sophie fell asleep between them, her head on Alaia's shoulder. Joe reached across to brush hair from his daughter's face, and his hand touched Alaia's. Their eyes met. Joe didn't pull his hand away. Thank you, he said quietly. For all of this. For her. For staying. Alaia turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. Thank you for giving me a reason to. They sat like that, Sophie sleeping between them, hands linked across her, watching the movie neither of them were paying attention to anymore. And Alaia understood that somewhere along the way, the business arrangement had become something real. She'd started this journey trying to save a child's life in an alley. She'd been terrified, coerced, protected against her will. But somehow, in the midst of danger and darkness, she'd found a family she never knew she needed. Joe squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, both of them holding on to this unexpected life they'd built together from chance and fear and ultimately choice. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, dangerous and beautiful, and full of people making choices that would change everything. But inside, in this moment, Alaia Stone Castello was exactly where she needed to be, protected not just by Joe's power, but by something more powerful still. Love, complicated and hard-won and absolutely real. And that, she thought as Sophie stirred in her sleep and Joe smiled at her across their daughter's head, was worth every risk she'd taken to get here.